Warning: the following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Accordingly, viewer discretion is advised. On the surface, Richard Kuklinski was unremarkable. He lived in a house in Dumont, New Jersey. He had a wife and 3 children. He coached Little League. He took his family to Disney World. He went to church on Sundays. His wife Barbara later said she had no idea that in all the years they were married, she never suspected a thing. What Richard Kuklinski was doing when he wasn't being a husband and father, was killing people for money. He claimed to have murdered over 100 men across more than 2 decades. Law enforcement confirmed 5. The true number is somewhere between those figures, and may never be precisely known. He was known as the Iceman. And his story is one of the most chilling examples of a double life in the history of American crime. Richard Leonard Kuklinski was born on April 11, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey, the second of 3 children born to Stanley and Anna Kuklinski, Polish Catholic immigrants living in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. His father Stanley was an alcoholic with a violent temper. He beat his children with a broomstick, a belt, whatever was within reach. Richard's older brother Florian was beaten so severely that he died from his injuries. The death was recorded as an accident. Nobody was charged. His mother Anna was also violent, physically abusive, emotionally cold, and completely unable to protect her children from their father or herself. Richard grew up learning that the world was defined by power and pain. That the way to survive was to be stronger, colder, and more dangerous than whatever was coming at you. He dropped out of school after 8th grade. By his mid-teens he was already involved in street crime in Jersey City. Running with a gang, committing robberies, developing a reputation for violence that went beyond what even hardened criminals were comfortable with. He later claimed his first killing was at the age of 14, a local bully named Charlie Lane who had humiliated him publicly. Kuklinski said he beat him to death with a wooden curtain rod. Whether that specific claim is true has never been verified. What is clear is that by the time Kuklinski reached adulthood, he had already crossed a threshold that most people never approach. Violence was not something that disturbed him. It was something he was good at. In the 1960s and 70s, Kuklinski's criminal activities brought him into contact with the New York Mafia, specifically the Gambino crime family, through a notoriously violent capo named Roy DeMeo. DeMeo ran one of the most ruthless crews in organized crime history, responsible for dozens of murders and an enormous stolen car and pornography operation. He was looking for men who could kill efficiently, quietly, and without emotional complications. Kuklinski was exactly what DeMeo needed. He was brought in as a contract killer, an independent operator hired to carry out specific murders for the Gambino family and, at various times, for the Genovese and de Cavalcante families as well. He was not a made member of the Mafia, he was Polish, not Italian, which barred him from full membership. But he was trusted, reliable, and completely without the hesitation that made other men unsuitable for contract work. Over the following 2 decades, Kuklinski killed with an extraordinary variety of methods. Firearms, knives, crossbow, ice pick, cyanide, administered through injection, through food, through aerosol spray, and on at least one occasion sprayed directly onto a victim's skin in a public place. He never expressed guilt. Never expressed hesitation. In the interviews he later gave for HBO documentaries, sitting calmly across from psychiatrists, he described his methods with the detached precision of someone discussing a trade. He once told an interviewer that the hardest part of killing wasn't the killing itself. It was the waiting. The patience required before an opportunity presented itself. The nickname came from a single case, though the method it described became something of a signature. In 1980, Kuklinski murdered a man named Louis Mosquet, shot him and stored his body in a large industrial freezer for approximately 2 years. When he finally disposed of the body in the New Jersey Pine Barrens in 1983, forensic investigators were baffled. The medical examiner found ice crystals in the body's tissues and determined that it had been kept frozen. The time of death was impossible to establish through normal means. The body had been preserved so thoroughly that decomposition had barely begun. It was a calculated move. By obscuring the time of death, Kuklinski was destroying one of investigators' primary tools for building a timeline and identifying suspects. He earned the nickname the Iceman because he would occasionally place his victims in freezers after he murdered them and leave them there for years until he dumped the bodies. This confused investigators who could not figure out time of death because the victims had been frozen. Through all of this, he came home to Dumont, New Jersey. Had dinner with his family. Helped with homework. Watched television. His wife Barbara later described him as a good provider. Loving toward his children. Occasionally violent toward her, but never, she said, did she suspect what he did when he wasn't home. The duality was total. And it lasted for over 20 years. By the early 1980s, law enforcement had begun to notice a pattern. Bodies were turning up, frozen, poisoned, shot, with no clear suspect and no obvious connection between victims beyond whispers that they had been seen with the same large, quiet man from New Jersey. A joint investigation was launched, the New Jersey State Police, the FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms all feeding into what would eventually become known as Operation Iceman. The key figure in bringing Kuklinski down was an ATF undercover agent named Dominic Polifrone. Polifrone spent 18 months building a cover identity as a mob-connected drug and weapons dealer named Michael Dominic Provenzano. His goal was to get close enough to Kuklinski to obtain recorded evidence of his crimes. It took time. After a year and a half into the investigation, Dominic still hadn't been introduced to Kuklinski. He eventually gained access through a criminal informant. A man named Lenny DePrima who agreed to make the introduction in exchange for immunity. Once introduced, Polifrone built a relationship with Kuklinski slowly and carefully, meeting in diners, in parking lots, at the truck stop where Kuklinski felt comfortable. Kuklinski, despite his experience, responded to the attention. He liked having someone who seemed to appreciate his capabilities. On one occasion, Kuklinski demonstrated to Polifrone how to lace a burger with cyanide. He described exactly how the poison worked. How quickly it took effect. How it was often mistaken for a heart attack. He described it as if he were explaining a recipe. It was all on tape. On December 17, 1986, Richard Kuklinski was arrested by undercover agents at a truck stop off the New Jersey Turnpike, marking the culmination of Operation Iceman. After the arrest, Polifrone learned something that made the previous 18 months feel considerably more dangerous in retrospect. He had been next on Kuklinski's hit list. In 1988, Richard Kuklinski was convicted of 4 murders and sentenced to consecutive life terms in Trenton State Prison. In 2003 he was convicted of a 5th murder, the killing of a New York police detective named Peter Calabro, and received an additional 30-year sentence. He would never leave prison. What made Kuklinski unusual in his later years was his willingness to talk. He gave extensive interviews. Most notably for 2 HBO documentaries, The Iceman Tapes in 1992 and The Iceman and the Vampire in 2003. He sat calmly in a prison interview room and described his crimes in extraordinary detail. His methods. His victims. His thought process. He claimed over 100 murders. Investigators confirmed 5 and suspected many more. The gap between those figures, and how much of what Kuklinski said was true versus performance, has been debated ever since. What struck everyone who interviewed him was the absence of anything recognizable as guilt or empathy. He spoke about killing the way other men spoke about work. A job. Something he was skilled at. Something that needed to be done. At one point, when asked if he felt anything when he killed someone, he paused, and said that sometimes he felt a little bad afterward. But not for very long. Richard Kuklinski died on March 5, 2006, at the age of 70. His death was labeled suspicious because Richard was supposed to testify against a former mobster who was being tried for murder. Whether his death was natural, or whether someone ensured he never made it to the witness stand, has never been established. Even in death, Richard Kuklinski left unanswered questions. Richard Kuklinski killed people for money. He came home afterward and lived a suburban life in New Jersey. He went to Disney World with his children. He did this for more than 20 years without being caught. What his case illustrates, beyond the violence, beyond the organized crime connections, beyond the HBO interviews, is how completely a human being can compartmentalize. How the man who freezes a body in an industrial unit and the man who coaches Little League can be the same person, sharing the same face, living in the same house. His wife Barbara said she had no idea. His daughters said they had no idea. His neighbors had no idea. The Iceman was hiding in the most ordinary place imaginable. A house on a quiet street in New Jersey. Subscribe if this case made you think. And leave a comment. Do you believe Kuklinski really killed over 100 people, or do you think he was exaggerating for the cameras? I really hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.